Today, we're going to continue talking about the single sufficient virtue by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. And I am going to be starting around page 15. To begin with, here is a quote of Rinpoche's. The mind's lucidity, the mind's self-recognition is independent of delusion, end quote. So this lucidity, or the mind's recognition of itself, is beyond content. It's simple awareness, just plain awareness. This is the nature of mind. You can be thinking about the past. You can be thinking about the future. You can be thinking about the present, conceptualizing about the present, even though it has the present in it, so to speak, as a concept. But it's still conceptual. All of this is thought. And thoughts aren't much different than a picture of a waterfall. You've frozen the waterfall, that there's no movement, there's no present. Thoughts about the future are speculation. The past is like a rotten seed. This is a very traditional Tibetan analogy. Nothing can grow from a rotten seed. Quote, abstaining from these three is called free from the three quarters, end quote. I will have to admit, I don't know what the fourth quarter is. I'll let you scratch your head about that one. But free from the past, the future, and thoughts of the present is referred to as free from the three quarters. So it is just plain simple awareness without elaboration. Rinpoche would sometimes use the analogy of a young child in a Tibetan shrine room. And Tibetan shrine rooms are very elaborate. Lots of statues, lots of paintings, lots of other things hanging from the ceiling on the shrine, and so forth. And the young child, it's all new to the young child. They can't say it's this or it's that. They can't put a label on any of it, yet they still experience it without conceptuality. So the point being here with being free of the three quarters, it means that we have lots of visual experience or other sensory experiences, but there's no conceptual overlay. It's totally new experience. Now, this state of simple awareness in the present moment, it needs to be pointed out by your guru. You may recognize it or you may not, but in the beginning, it is pointed out by your guru. And your guru, he or she, will not do this unless they feel you are ready. To be ready is the need to do the preliminary practices, which are usually called Nundro. The longer title is that which goes before Mahamudra. And there are practices you have to do really before you're ready for doing Nundro. This is a process, one step at a time. So we need to do these foundation practices and then the preliminary practices. If the guru feels that you are ready, we'll give you pointing out instructions. Here's another quote from the book. Once recognized, it is just this single sufficient virtue that needs to be cultivated ceaselessly at all times and in all activities. So the important point here is once you have recognized the nature of your mind, we cultivate it over and over and over again so that you have confidence in the recognition, so that you can recognize it in different circumstances, whether the mind is still or the mind is moving. And underneath all of that is one's confidence and devotion to the guru. That is an extremely important point, that you have a lot of devotion and confidence in your guru. By doing this, the recognition becomes perfectly stable through this constant cultivation. And the result is, of course, fruition. And the fruition means independence from all conditions. It means Buddhahood, the state of Vajradhara. And all the great masters of the past have practiced this, cultivating this recognition. On page 16, Rinpoche says, if you recognize this and can practice this, then it is all sufficient. End quote. So again, going back to the title, this is the single sufficient virtue. If you recognize it, cultivate it, practice it over and over again, this is all you need to do. I want to keep emphasizing this, that you do have to have a solid foundation of other practices so that you are prepared for the recognition and your mind is stable enough and you have the devotion that it takes to continually practice that recognition and strengthen it and strengthen your confidence. To go on, it's not appearances that are a problem. It's not that we talk ourselves into thinking that a mind is empty, appearances are empty, therefore they're not real, and we just can pretend they don't exist. Appearances will continue to appear. The problem is not the appearances, it's our fixation on them. So Rinpoche advises, do not meditate with your eyes closed. Don't try to get appearances to cease. Don't try to get thoughts to cease. That's not the point. And then he goes on to emphasize these three qualities of mind. Quote, all three things, the emptiness of the nature, the lucidity in the character, and the variety of appearances in the manifestation are equally displays of dharmata, displays of the true nature of reality. So that calls for a definition of dharmata. And the definition that I found that makes the clearest sense to me is dharmata is the essence of reality, completely pure nature. To bring this into the context of the three kayas, the Dharmakaya is the emptiness of nature. The Sambhogakaya is the lucidity in character, and the Nirmanakaya is the variety of appearances in manifestation. Again, the key here is to be free of fixation. Quote, that is the root, the fundamental meaning of understanding your mind to be the three kayas. What this means is free from attachment to experiences, free from attachment to thoughts, to our emotions, even positive ones. He then talks about the Mahamudra lineage supplication. There are two lines in it that go, the essence of thought is Dharmakaya, as is taught. Nothing whatsoever, but everything arises from it. Rinpoche's commentary is, quote, this is a very precise description of the experience of mind, which is to say, experience per se. So this is the experience of mind. The mind is nothing, but everything arises from it. It doesn't come from outside the mind. It comes from within the mind. So experience is simply a word for having a mind. If you have experience, you have a mind. If you are aware, you have a mind. Again, in Mahamudra lineage supplication, it says nothing whatsoever. Mind is nothing whatsoever. And this means free of inherent existence, that mind is interdependent, that mind is free of substance. Mind is not the brain. It's not a series of chemical reactions that occur in the brain. It's free of subject object, of subject that is experiencing an object. And finally, mind is not limited. Quote, appearances are unlimited and potentially infinite, end quote. So there is nothing that is beyond mind. Mind is not limited by anything. There is nothing that is beyond mind. There is nothing that is not included in mind. To go on, he talks about some other lines in the Mahamudra supplication. May I realize the inseparability of samsara and nirvana. And Rinpoche's commentary on this is nirvana is inseparable from samsara in the sense that it is the nature of samsara. So if samsara is realized and it is experienced without delusion, you have nirvana. It's not that samsara comes from here and nirvana comes from there. The source is the same. It's just a matter of how a person or a being experiences them. If you're deluded, you will experience samsara. If you're realized, you will experience nirvana. So here are some thoughts of mine. If they're inseparable, what's the point? Why can't we just agree on that and then go on to the next topic? The problem is that we're so fixated on duality, on the subject object. This is called the cognitive obscuration. It is taking that which is not a self to be a self, and that which is not other to be an other. And this dualistic approach, this dualistic way of thinking, keeps us from accessing or experiencing all of the quote natural wondrous attributes of our mind. This is what blocks us from experiencing nirvana or samsara as nirvana or seeing the inseparability of the two. On the other hand, this fixation on subject and object is an attachment to something that has never existed. It does not exist. It will not exist, has not existed in the past. The past, present, and future are free of it and always will be. This is what delusion is. An interesting type of investigation would be to search for your mind separate for an object of awareness. Can you be aware of something without being aware of an object, or can you just be aware? And then, well, what is aware? This has to do with insight meditation, of course, and contemplation. So here's a longer quote from Rinpoche on page 19. Nevertheless, the reason we are seeking freedom from attachment is because all of our attachment is attachment to what does not exist, to something that has never existed and could never possibly exist. In short, it is our fixation on non-existent subject and non-existent object separates us from that subject, our dualism that veils or obscures all of the natural, wondrous attributes of our mind. Then he tells this story about the wrestler with the jewel in his forehead. Milarepa talked about this with Gampopa when Gampopa was Milarepa's student. The point of this is that looking for Buddhahood outside is fruitless and pointless. So this wrestler at an early age had a jewel implanted in his forehead as a mark of distinction, kind of that he was special. And then as he grew up and became a wrestler, he injured his head in one match and his head swelled up and he couldn't see the jewel anymore. And he thought that he had lost it. He searched everywhere for it. He couldn't find it. He enlisted other people to search for it. They looked far and wide and nobody could find it. Rinpoche said then that he finally went to someone intelligent to help, and that man said, wait for the wound to heal and the swelling to subside. And the man did that and came back to the intelligent man, and the intelligent man noticed that there was a small swelling on the forehead of this wrestler. And he opened it up. It sounds a little painful, but he opened it up, and inside that swelling was the jewel, that the jewel had just been pushed further into the wrestler's forehead, but it was always there, just obscured. So the point is that we look outside as Buddhahood and think that it must be far away. and we seek to gain it. We seek to grab a hold of it and bring it into our experience. Well, it has always been there. It's always been intrinsic to our mind. We can't be separated from it. What comes to mind is a little nursery rhyme, probably an English nursery rhyme that I learned when I was a little kid. I don't know what Rinpoche would say, but I'm going to stick my neck out here and repeat it. And it was, Little Bo Peep has lost her sheep and doesn't know where to find them. Leave them alone. They'll come home wagging their tails behind them. So that is my take on the story of the wrestler with the jewel in his head that went looking around wherever they were to find them and couldn't find them. So the idea is to quit looking outside of yourself, and that freedom from samsara is found within the mind. It's not outside of ourselves. He then starts talking about pure realms and deities and so forth. And he says, quote, these things exist. They are the natural display of attributes that are always present within us all the time. So all of this is within us. It's just that we have not realized it. This is not in the book, but what comes to my mind when he was teaching on that was at the time of death, and we enter the bardo, that all of these deities, peaceful and wrathful deities, appear to us and to the beings that have not realized the nature of their mind. They appear to be external to them, but they really are just appearances that are arising from their mind. And the whole point of preparing for the bardo is to realize that all of these deities are your own mind. The essence of all the teachings given by the Buddha lead to awakening and lead to the same place. The teachings were varied according to the dispositions and needs of beings, but they all lead to the same place. Rinpoche quotes Maitreya in the Uttara Tantra Shastra. Quote, all beings are actual Buddhas, however, they are obscured by transitory veils. I think it would be good to describe the three veils. I've already gone into the cognitive obscuration, the dualistic veil of thinking I am a self and there is other. And then there is the klesha veil, which is based on this separation of self and other. And as a result, self feels attached to the pleasant other, it gets irritated, angry, hostile, and even hatred to the unpleasant other, and feels that it can ignore other if it's neither strongly pleasant or strongly unpleasant, and then can feel jealousy if others got a better deal, and can feel pride if it feels it has a better deal. And then, of course, there's always greed, that these are the veil of the kleshas. I had a Zoom teaching with inmates this afternoon, and I explained this to them this way. You may have heard me say this before. So you're feeling kind of arrogant, and you invite a group of friends to go to this restaurant, and you're paying for it. And it's going to be a good restaurant. And so you go in there feeling pretty proud, and everybody orders their food, and then the food comes, the waitress puts it on the table, and you start seeing these other plates of food, and you see one plate and you think, oh, I wish I would have ordered that. That looks better than mine. Now you're jealous. And then later on, the waitress spills some food on you, and now you get mad. You're done with being jealous. You're done with feeling arrogant. Now you're mad, and you yell at the waitress. After that, it comes time for a tip, and your group of friends start putting money into a pot for the tip for the waitress, and you're feeling stingy, greedy, and you don't put any money in. And then on your way out, you're thinking, I wish this never would have happened. And that's the klesha veils in a dinner. If we look closely, we'll see that we go through this every day of our lives. The third veil is the veil of karma and habitual patterns. To bring it up to the present level of technology, that's like putting your car on cruise control. Smart cruise control, but it's still pretty dumb, where you're just operating on the basis of habitual patterns. You're not really thinking, you're not using any intelligence. It's just that this is the way you have done things over and over and over again. And you feel pretty comfortable and safe doing things the same way over and over and over again. But these three are what keep us from experiencing this fundamental nature of our mind, that keep us from experiencing that we are actually a Buddha. Now, here's another quote from Rinpoche. What Maitreya refers to is what Kalu Rinpoche describes in this text as the innate presence within us of what we call Dharmakaya, Buddha nature, or the wisdom of the Buddhas. That's on page 21. So this Buddha nature is equal in all sentient beings and in all Buddhas. It's not that some get more and some gets less. It's equal in all beings, even animals, insects, and beings in the other realms. And it's important to remember that all Buddhas began where we are, that it isn't that they somehow or another got a better birth and started from a better place than we started from. We have no less ability and potential than to become a fully enlightened Buddha. The Buddhas attained to Buddhahood gradually and by practicing the teachings from previous Buddhas, and gradually they removed these three veils that obscured their Buddha nature. So Rinpoche gives some advice here. He says, don't denigrate yourself. Don't sell yourself short. These are my own words, but have a can-do attitude, that I can do this. Have a feeling that this is not that far away. It's actually very close. It just needs to be revealed. And avoid having an attitude of, oh, it's impossible, or it's incomprehensible, or I could never do that. These are actually signs of laziness. He says that age, gender, social position, all of this is not a factor. I see it this way. There are what are called spiritual biographies that are intended to inspire, like the life of Marpa, the life of Milarepa. This is not a book intended to do that. This is a I can do this, or you can do this too book. It's much more personal than I intend to inspire you with this book. You could say it's almost more like a motivational book, that you can do this. This is who you are. This is your nature. Here is a quote from page 22. If we simply learn the method by which they, in parenthesis, attributes and wisdom, end parenthesis, are revealed and practice it with sufficient diligence, then we can and will attain Buddhahood. So learn the methods, develop and nurture our attributes and our wisdom, and this will reveal everything in practice when sufficient diligence is applied. This implies we need a teacher. We need to practice more. Diligence is joyful exertion. There are other ways to look at diligence, but that is the definition that I prefer. Rinpoche definitely used that. And then we need to have this motivation. And of course, we do need inspiration. So all of those become our assets. Now, to add to that, we need to add bodhicitta to this motivation to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. Quote Rinpoche, don't be timid, end quote. I put that in bold in my notes. Don't be timid. The bodhicitta is opening yourself up to want to reduce the suffering of others and lead them to Buddhahood. Rinpoche says that when someone becomes a Buddha, they become like the sun, that they radiate naturally and impartially on all beings everywhere. That's an expression of bodhicitta. So we need to encourage that bodhicitta too, because that's where we're going. So we need courage, we need commitment if we're going to travel the path. And we have to give up a feeling of needing security. We've not traveled this path before, so it's going to be unfamiliar. And this goes back to needing courage, the courage to go further than a person that gives in to fear. Now, on page 22, Rinpoche says this: the actual process of recognition and stabilization is not that complex. It simply has to be done, and one can do it in one lifetime. But you have to begin the process by turning your back on delusion. And what that means is an element of renunciation, renouncing the causes of suffering. This is actually compassion towards yourself. It's understanding what causes suffering, how you cause your own suffering, and then renouncing it. It does not work if we just want less suffering in samsara while we're still fixated on samsara. You can't have it both ways. So it does take this renunciation. To go on here, he says the only way anyone has achieved the Dharmakaya was through recognizing and gradually revealing this innate nature of their own mind. This is the most important aspect of all Buddhist training. Quote, if having heard this, you gain recognition of your mind's nature to the point where you can sustain it and work with it, then this really is the great panacea of Mahamudra, because it is all self-sufficient. End quote. Here again, he uses the term all sufficient. He also talks about the root guru. The root guru is the teacher who successfully points out your mind's nature to you. This is the teacher who actually helps you, quote, and these are my own quotes, get it. These aren't Rinpoche's quotes, but I'm just using that. This is the teacher that helps you see it. And again, this is the basis of your eventual achievement of Buddhahood. And there's no greater kindness that a person can show towards you than pointing out the true nature of your mind. This next quote is, to be a real follower of our tradition, the Kagyu tradition, is to have gained this recognition. And if you have gained it, your appreciation for your root guru who has handed it to you will be tremendous, end quote. So this increases one's devotion to their teacher. When you do experience it and gain this recognition, you realize how important this is and how kind your teacher has been to you. Again, the responsibility for recognition lies with the disciple. It isn't that the teacher can just hand it to you, but once recognized, you don't necessarily change in your outer appearance. It's what's going on inside your mind that changes. You want to sustain this recognition as much as you can. Keep investigating your mind and recognizing it in all kinds of different situations. In that case, quote, what you do externally will not matter, and it will not take away from that. The question was actually quite long, and it was about you're going through your life and you're looking, how do you work with emotions, thoughts? How do you get beyond them? How do you work with them? I maybe not rephrasing this question in its entirety, but it's basically, how do you do this? Well, here is my attempt at an answer. There are many different ways to do this. The first is, of course, to calm the mind down through practice, whether it be meditation practice, doing Nundro, or other practices that we do that are all beneficial. The point is that through practice, we gradually calm our minds down. I once got a fortune when I was out at Carmeling eating with Rinpoche, and it said, to see your drama is to be liberated from it. And in a way, it is becoming more and more aware of our drama and going, it's just drama. I can let go of it. And then the question is, when you let go of it, what's there? So there's so many different ways to do this, but there is no, I think the present very popular word is hack. I'm not aware of a hack where you can suddenly get around all of this. Once I heard Lama Yeshe Gyamtso, he was translating, and he talked about, this is for Rinpoche, and the term came up, leaper. And that was that some people do get it and suddenly they leap and progress dramatically. But there aren't many leapers among us. And so we have to kind of do what we can, keep practicing, and try to keep aware of what's going on in our minds and investigate. Part of insight meditation, let's say you went to that restaurant with your friends and you went through all of those different emotions. When you get home, sit down and think about it. How you went through all of those, why you went through all of those. Was it necessary to go through all of those emotions? How could I avoid doing all of this? The follow-up question was, I think about awareness as the ground where all of that happens. And that is a good way to look at it. Actually, after you do all this examination and insight meditation, it's excellent to then just do shamatha, non-referential shamatha. The question was, would you repeat Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's instructions about not looking inside, not looking outside, not looking for stillness, and so forth? In other words, the looking itself is a distraction. What you need to do is look at the essence. Instead of looking at, you might say, all the leaves and branches in a tree, look at the essence of the tree. And this is difficult to say. I mean, it's easy to say, but difficult to understand. That was brought up in a previous question. But to look at what the essence of the thought is, or the thoughts are, or the emotions, or the sight or the sound, the sensory impression. What is it that is the essence? And eventually you come to the understanding that whether the mind is still or moving, the essence is the same. Whether it is samsara or nirvana, the essence is the same. The question is, you mentioned give up attachment. How do you do that? Well, the first thing is to see our attachments. It's very easy to not see them or think they're justified or think that there's nothing I can do about it. This is the way I am. I see a fancy red car and I think, boy, that would be nice if I was driving that car, or whatever it is. I've noticed on Facebook lately, a lot of people down in tropical areas, subtropical areas, on the beach with a lot of skin exposed, not necessarily 3/4 naked, but like, shorts, short sleeve, as opposed to up here where you're bundled up outside yet, and being attached to that. First of all, it's just seeing your attachment. And it doesn't necessarily mean that going out in a cave and giving up everything, but we can have pleasant food, pleasant experiences, but not be obsessed with them. It's a matter of accepting what comes our way, but not getting attached to it. Ordinarily, we are very picky about what we would like and spend a lot of time trying to control external circumstances so that it meets what our expectations are. And so it's a kind of letting go of being so fussy. I think that's a good way to put it. It begins with letting go of being so fussy. The question is Holiness, Taisitu Rinpoche both said we have to give up this life. How can we do that? It's not an all or nothing sort of situation, but we can let go of things a little bit. We can let go a little bit of trying to control so much in our lives. When difficult situations come up, instead of trying to somehow or another manipulate it, get around it, find a workaround or so forth, just be with it and recognize the feelings that you're having and learn from it. There is a saying in Tibetan Buddhism that our best teacher is our worst enemy. Just giving up the idea that you need to destroy an enemy or you have to get away from an enemy. Khandro Rinpoche told this story one time. This happened around Losar, and it was in India. And of course, at Losar, all the Tibetans wanted to get on the train and go to Dharamsala to be with the Dalai Lama celebrating Losar. If you've been to India, you know that what happens in India on the trains is the porters and all the other people that work for the train and at the terminal, their job is to hassle you until you pay the money so they don't hassle you. So you had everybody from Rinpoches and their attendants to very poor Tibetans. And the attendants were being hassled by the baggage handlers and the ticket collectors, and everybody else was, and the Rinpoches weren't being treated with respect, and the attendants were getting upset at the baggage handlers and the other employees because they were just hassling until they got paid off to not hassle. And finally, when things were getting to, you might say, a boiling point in terms of everybody getting angry, one of the Rinpoches started doing prostrations to one of the baggage handlers. And at that point, everything just cooled right down. That the Rinpoche was doing prostrations to a great teacher, a teacher of great patience.